In every season in the history of Overwatch League, there's those guys who we wish could have gotten another shot in the spotlight. Those guys who we never felt got to unleash their full potential in the Overwatch League because they just weren't given a proper chance. And what's interesting is the path as to how a lot of these players got into this situation varies. For some people, they just ended up on a team that was a poor fit, they rode the bench, and then never got a second chance, while other people ended up on a bad team with inept management. And in some cases, it's as simple as getting very unlucky in a weird set of circumstances. No matter the reasoning, what all these guys have in common is that they all flashed talents or were specific fan favorites that we thought probably could have thrived if given an opportunity in the right situation. And today, we're going to highlight some of these individuals and their stories. Here's a list of some Overwatch League players that definitely deserved another chance. And I can't possibly think of a better place to start than with Adam. If you're familiar with Adam's story, you realize that he's probably the unluckiest player in Overwatch League history. If you don't know who he is, allow me to explain. So Adam was an Australian Contenders player back in the day, a solid tank prospect, and one of the rare players from that region that actually drew interest from Overwatch League teams. In particular, the LA Valiant in the 2021 offseason were looking to upgrade or at least make a change at their tank position. They parted ways with McGravy, who they just thought wasn't getting the job done, and they decided to give Adam a chance. Scouting did an excellent job in the previous season of finding some random players and making them into reliable talents, and the thought process was that they could do the same with Adam. However, that day for Adam to make his league debut never ended up happening. As we all know, in the 2021 offseason, shortly before the regular season was set to begin, the Valiant announced that they were moving their management to China and that they were releasing all of their players effective immediately. And unfortunately, because of the timing of when the Valiant released their roster, there was just no chance for him to find another team before the season started, and interest just wasn't that high overall. So unfortunately, Adam would end up sitting out the 2021 season. However, it seemed that the Florida Mayhem were willing to give him a second chance at life. Gunba, an Australian coach, was taking over as the head coach of Florida at the time, and he realized the talents of Adam, and I think he wanted to give him a chance. So, Florida decided to pick him up with their new core. Finally, the Adam redemption story. It's gonna happen. We're gonna see this guy play in OWL for real. He's gonna travel to America. It's gonna be great. Or so we thought, because unfortunately for Adam, he was playing alongside the next generational prospect at tank in someone who just so happened to be able to play literally anything in the game without a problem, even in his rookie season, which meant that Adam was practically useless to the team, and he ended up never seeing the stage and getting released mid-season. That's the legacy he unfortunately had to leave behind. 2 chances in the Overwatch League just to never actually get that opportunity to prove himself. He ends up on a bad org in one instance, and then in the other, he just so happens to play along the next god at tank. You literally can't make this stuff up. I don't think you could possibly find a more unlucky story than Adam. 2 chances at the Overwatch League with 0 minutes of playtime. I feel for that guy, man. He deserved a chance to prove himself. Clearly the talent was there if 2 different OWL teams wanted to give him that shot. And it's unfortunate that we never got to see him be on the stage. Whether he was good or not is kind of up in the air. It's up for you to interpret. But the fact of the matter is, he got absolutely no chance to actually prove himself. The next player who most certainly deserved another chance is Vigilante. This is another one of those what could have been stories, as Vigilante heading into the Overwatch League back in 2022 was seen as one of the more sought after prospects. He was one of the best support players on the market, he looked excellent on Talon Esports, the potential was there for him to be a top tier flex support. Everybody thought this guy was great. He was widely recognized by teammates, scouts, and coaches alike as a guy that could end up being one of the best players in the game. The Washington Justice were fortunate enough to acquire his services and win the bidding war at the time, and it seemed like they were making a big upgrade at their support position. However, unfortunately, immediate difference, but it just didn't last, as almost immediately the Justice decided to make a turn and stop investing in the Overwatch League, which meant that Vigilante was a key trade target. They traded that guy away immediately. It seems like his future could be bright there. But then we know what happens after that, when Atlanta assembles their super team with Chio and Fielder, and once again this guy is forced to ride the bench. He played like one time for the Atlanta Reign outside of the Pro-Am. It is tragic to see all of that potential go to waste. And unlike somebody like Adam, we actually got to see what Vigilante was capable of in his rookie year. That's what makes it more tragic than anything else. We saw that potential, and why people truly were so high on him. But he just never got that chance to thrive and really grow as a player because of these unfortunate scenarios that he was constantly thrown into. To move down the line, the next guy I'd like to bring up is KSA. This guy, just knowing what he did post-Overwatch League with Team Saudi Arabia and with Twisted Minds, makes me really sad that he never got that second shot in the Overwatch League. It was an exciting time for KSA, showing off a really solid Sigma in particular. And don't forget, he was in a pretty unfavorable environment with teammates he hadn't really played with before. He was on ping as well, a lot of disadvantages going his way, but he still managed to be a pretty respectable rookie player on short notice. A bunch of people for years afterwards were wishing that somebody would give him a chance, but that day sadly never came. While I don't think KSA would trade anything away for the world just knowing how much he's achieved, I think a lot of teams definitely missed out. Like, think about what he's done post-Owl. Winning contenders, dominating in fact, multiple seasons in a row, dominating Saudi E-League, looking really good in the World Cup as well. He evolved his gameplay so much, and it feels like a lot of teams missed out on this guy. Number 4, Sanguinar. Maybe this one is a bit obscure for some of you out there, especially for more recent viewers, but Sanguinar back in 2020 for the London Spitfire was one of the bright spots of that team, that really, really bad team, that failed experiment. Outside of Glister and maybe Bernard, he was probably their best player. I mean, London found a true hidden gem with this dude. He hadn't even played a game of contenders in his life before joining Owl in 2020. He was a complete unknown shot in the dark that scouting managed to find, and he ended up being a major diamond in the rough. Maybe not an S-tier main support who could be a god at the game, but certainly somebody you had to look out for, and probably one of the more clutch main supports that we saw during that time period. And after putting out a good rookie campaign, the London Spitfire decided that they didn't like this experiment. They were transitioning to their fully EU team, so Sanguinar had no place on the roster anymore. And in spite of great efforts and looking like a prospect that could be molded into a pretty special player, I'd like to think, nobody ever gave him that chance. After 2020, he never touched the Overwatch League stage ever again. And that's in spite of him continuing to grind and develop his game and look good on some pretty solid Korean contenders teams like O2 Blast and Sin Priza, for example. In spite of a good first year in the league and some good follow-up years, it always felt like there was crickets around this guy, never any real interest, despite some fully Korean teams struggling big time at their support line in particular. A team like NYXL, for example, going with Friday over Sanguinar, seems pretty questionable at this point in time. I know not everybody thinks that highly of him, and some people even think he was overrated in contenders, but just knowing where he came from, coming literally from nowhere to have a solid rookie year, I just don't think it makes any sense that he never got that second opportunity. The motor was clearly there for him to develop into something more. In 2020, statistically, he was one of the better main supports in the league. He showed that he's a great decision maker, with one of the lowest death rates on Lucio and Brigitte. And at the same time, despite being more on the passive side, he had that engine to him, where he would step up when his team needed him to, and he ended up having one of the highest environmental kill rates on Lucio. The fact that he did so much of that early on and proved himself just to get another chance is something that I'm still sad about to this day. He was probably one of my favorite support prospects of all time, and he seemingly became nothing after such a great start to his career. Moving back into guys who never really got a chance to play on stage, how about we throw in Aprita? A guy who was seen as one of the next up-and-coming talents from the Chinese scene, it seemed like Aprita was going to be a huge difference maker when he joined the Chengdu Hunters in 2022. They just came off their best season yet, and they're looking to build upon their DPS line, and Aprita was looking like the best recruit they could have ever asked for. He was a good hit scan player that would match well with Leave. The talent was there for him to truly be a young star on the rise. There was a strong belief that he could be a very good player in the league, but that day to see him play on stage never came true. The Chengdu Hunters, like many teams during the Overwatch 2 era, were suffering financially. In fact, they had it worse than anybody else, as their parent company was down horrendous when it came to their stocks. They were at a loss, which meant that the Hunters were not going to be able to sustain their roster. They were going to have to pivot to a budget roster by trading away players and cutting contracts, and sadly, Aprita ended up being one of those victims. What could have been a very exciting new chapter for the Chengdu Hunters, where they continued their success and built upon their DPS line, turned out to be one of the biggest what-ifs in the history of professional Overwatch. And thanks to their issues, Aprita was out of a job. Now luckily, almost immediately after, the Guangzhou Charge picked him up on their academy team, and eventually they promoted him to their main roster when they made their pivot mid-season to try and save their playoff hopes. So this seemed like a new chance at life for him, right? Finally, he's gonna get to have his talents recognized, he can be a starter on a team, and he can realize that potential that we thought he was gonna have on Chengdu. Well, not quite, because another former hit scan of Chengdu ended up hogging the spotlight, that being Jimmy. He was excellent at Sojourn, he provided the team a needed boost, he looked good with Choi Se-wan, which meant that Aprita was nothing but fodder, and a guy that would ride the bench and never see the stage a single time for the Guangzhou Charge before finally getting released in the 2023 offseason, and from there, he never got another shot at Owl ever again. Just knowing how good he was for Team Chaser back in the day and how much hype he was generating from the community, it is absurd that we never got to see this guy even step foot on stage knowing his talents. If given an opportunity to start with the right coaching, he could have been a difference maker somewhere, or at least have made a respectable career for himself, but instead he ends up on the unlucky side of history, much like a bunch of other guys on this list. Rolling into the number 6 spot is Zunba. Maybe a controversial take for some of you, just knowing how bad the 2018 Dynasty were, but Zunba is a pretty famous off-tank player. He made a name for himself very early on with his skill in the World Cup and on Lunatic High, an excellent Zarya and D.Va player. He could do a bit of everything, and honestly, even during the inaugural season when the Dynasty were suffering, I always thought they played the best when he was in the game, and he had some reliable performances that made things a bit better than they could have been. He showed he had the talent, he had the knack to be a starting off-tank in the league. His D.Va play was more than good enough. He made a lot of the right decisions out there with his macro play, body blocking for teammates, keeping that death count down low, and when pocketed on Zarya, this dude was a monster. In spite of that though, the Dynasty were just absolutely terrible, and they even tried replacing him with freaking Zephyr, for crying out loud. That's the situation this guy was dealing with. That is totally out of his control. And in 2019, it was more of the same. Not so much with the team being inept and not being very good, but in the sense that they just thought he wasn't the right fit for their starting lineup. Back during the day, I thought that him and Fissure could have made for an excellent tank line. But instead, they went with the new guy, Michelle. They thought he was a better fit, and Zunba saw minimal play time overall. But in spite of that, whenever they would randomly sub him in from time to time, he still looked good and made a difference for this Seoul team. But even then, they still didn't feel the need to play him. Michelle was maybe the better fit because of his flexibility and being able to play the Sombra and having the synergy with Marvel and everything, but Zunba was just too talented to have all of that go to waste on the bench. I really wish the Dynasty either traded him or released him. That would never happen because once he's a Tiger, he's always going to be a Tiger. He'd never leave that Lunatic High core, but damn is it a shame that he never got to start ever again after the 2018 season. This guy had it in him to be a legendary off-tank even in the Overwatch League. There was never a time where I was sitting there saying, man, Zunba's really stinking it up. This guy is making this team suffer. It just never happened. He'd always elevate his teams. So the fact that one of the most famous tank players pre-Owl never got a chance to start after one season is criminal. And it sucks too, because after 2019, he decided to move into Valorant. That was his last hurrah, riding on the bench of that Dynasty team. That's crazy to me, man. He definitely could have been a starting caliber off-tank in the league still. I have no doubt in my mind. Maybe I'm fanboying out a bit too much there, but in my opinion, Zunba was always good, and he just never got the proper chance in some very unfortunate circumstances. For number 7 on the list, I'm going to do a bit of a triple threat for you and talk about 3 2019 Shanghai players, that being Luffy, Coma, and Ding. All 3 of these guys basically had their careers end after 2019, and that's in spite of helping to elevate Shanghai to the status they'd end up finding eventually. They were the ones that helped orchestrate that turnaround with some of their play, especially in the Stage 3 tournament. All 3 of these guys were playing out of their goddamn minds. Luffy on the Ana, Coma body blocking on the Mercy, and of course Ding for his incredible Sombra and Pharah play. But it was clear that they were just stepping stones for this team. It was mostly the transition period for them to help put them on the map and then get this team into a better spot by replacing them with even better players. Now, to be fair, that strategy ended up working well. They were a great stepping stone that led to the acquisitions of Izayaki and Lee Jae-gon and Fleta. You can't really blame Shanghai for benching them when they had those guys on the team. But I think it's kind of sad that they never got a chance to spread their wings elsewhere, knowing how big of a carry they were at the time. Coma showed that he could be a reliable main support. I think that Luffy, even though he did get to play a little on Shanghai, probably at least could have been more of a rotational piece on a different team that was maybe a bit weaker. And Ding, he was maybe a bit more on the niche side with his hero pool, but the potential was definitely there for him to be something good. All 3 of these guys only got one real hurrah in the league, and just knowing the heroes that they were to Shanghai back in the day, I find that to be pretty sad. Number 8, Jungwoo. This is a guy that I personally didn't have a lot of hype for, but I know a lot of people in the community loved this guy to death and thought that he deserved to not only be the starter for Houston full time, but to get another chance after 2021. And to be fair, I think it's understandable to have that mindset, as Jungwoo and Piggy weren't expected by everybody to be that great. A lot of haters thought that them coming out of Talon would not make much of a difference for Houston, but almost immediately they'd become one of the most exciting young tank duos in the league. He had a really solid start to his career, probably one of the most exciting for a tank player in recent memory, and the Outlaws continued to roll. They were never winning any tournaments, but they were staying around, they're continuing to be relevant, but then Houston decided to sign Dreamer, and Jungwoo's career kind of just went out the window after that. And I think it's understandable why. Houston have said that he wasn't the greatest communicator, not to mention that his hero pool maybe wasn't the best outside of Ryan and Orisa. So it made sense why they'd bench him more so for Dreamer. In my opinion, Dreamer was just the better fit overall, but you can't change the fact that Jungwoo did have a very explosive start to his career, and the potential is definitely there, and he was a big-time energy boost. You could see that guy talking a lot and getting hyped. It felt like maybe there could have been more for this guy out there, if given the right opportunity, if put on a different team, maybe in a non-mixed environment on a fully Korean team, he could have thrived even more. But after that great start on Houston and then eventually getting benched, there was no real interest for this guy. He wanted to find a new team, I believe, but no one ended up signing him, and after that, he decided to retire and pursue military service, and that was that. Maybe one of the shortest primes I've ever seen, and it truly is tragic. Number 9. Huyao. Maybe another controversial pick, another guy that played ages ago that you don't think that much about, who just could never find his way back to the league, and maybe the hype wasn't that great for everybody. But, I mean, Huyao had a pretty good start to his career. On GC Busan, he won an Apex championship alongside Prophet and Jester, and he looked okay on London when he got to play. He just lost his job to Fury, which, I mean, understandable. Fury had one hell of a year back then. It makes sense that they choose to move on from you in favor of one of the best off-tanks in the game at the time. But what I find so tragic is that nobody ever gave him another chance in the Overwatch League after this. His career, at least owl-wise, ended after 2018. We're talking a guy that was part of one of the most famous cores at the time, a guy that literally competed with Fury for playtime to make that starting job position up in the air, a guy that won an Apex championship before. Nobody wanted to give this guy another chance, and that's in spite of him continuing to grind after his time on London, continuing to do well with a lot of contenders teams. We saw him make deep tournament runs with XL2 Academy, Gen G, Runaway, Team CC. Wherever this guy went, success followed. And while I wouldn't say he was amazing on any of these teams, he was at least serviceable. He had his moments, and it's a testament to his skill that he was able to find a job for so many teams and do well with them. Just knowing the history and how he expanded upon his game throughout the years, it's kind of crazy to think that nobody bothered to give him the time of day. And that's coming from somebody who never saw the hype with him. I recognize the resume that he had, and I can sympathize with the people that thought he deserved another chance. With that type of resume that he had, he probably should have gotten a chance, even if he was just a bench player. Something out there should have opened up for him, right? I think more than anything, it would have been nice to see this guy get another chance to ultimately answer the question between the haters and the stands on whether this guy truly deserved another chance or not. I know not everybody loved him, but I know a lot of people did as well, so I thought I'd throw him on the list. And lastly, for the final spot in this video, I'm going with Glister. Now, technically, he did get second chances after his initial stint on the London Spitfire. In that sense, he is much different than the rest of the entries on this list. However, I'm including Glister because I think he deserved a better opportunity than what he'd ended up receiving in 2022. I think he got absolutely screwed over out of playing on a better team and maybe extending his career for a bit longer. He had a pretty good start on the Spitfire, and he was a sought-after free agent in 2021. Things were looking really exciting when he joined the Shock. It seemed like he was going to unleash his full potential and be the next superstar. Some people even saying he could be the MVP of the league, but it just never happened. He wasn't the right fit on the Shock, and maybe the meta didn't always fall the way that he was hoping it to, so he ended up being good, but not the great player that you'd hope. Disappointing, yes, but I just think the Shock in general were a bit of a mess that year, and he wasn't the best fit in their system. I think with all the potential that he had, that he could have done more if he was on a different team that maybe invested in him more, or maybe if the meta slightly went more his way. It was definitely there. He showed the flashes on the Shock, and I thought that maybe was enough to warrant him signing to a decent team in 2022, but in the end he had to settle for the Paris Eternal, who, as we all know, would end up becoming the biggest meme on the face of the earth as an organization. From what I can recall, he didn't love playing there, and it was pretty uncomfortable overall, which led to Vegas, or I guess I should say Paris at the time, releasing him after like 1 month of being there. That is absolutely insane. That's the legacy he'd end up leaving behind in the Overwatch 2 era. 1 month of play for the worst franchise ever, arguably. Like, bruh, he deserves so much better than that, knowing the potential he had. The path that he followed is extremely tragic. I don't know, man. I just find it ridiculous that with that type of talent and his potential and playing for a team like the Shock, that no team better than Paris was in the market for him. That no other team had interest at the time in signing him. Are you telling me this is the best he had? This was his best offer? The only offer, even, potentially? We're talking a 5-star level prospect back in 2020. If you were around during that day, you know the hype that surrounded him and the talents that he brought to the table and how much of a beast he was on Gen G even. Glister was supposed to be the next big thing, but the circumstances he ended up settling with, always seemingly, were just the absolute worst. I can't believe that no team better than London could get this guy on their team. Like, that's just crazy to me that that's how it starts. And then with the Shock, it's just unlucky, bad fit, whatever. But then after that, nobody wanted to put their hands on this guy? I just think that's unreal. Knowing what he could have been, knowing his potential as a hit scan player, he deserved something more. He deserved another chance on a stable team that actually invested in him, that wasn't a complete meme. I feel so bad for Glister. He's one of the bigger what-ifs out there, and I know to this day, there's a lot of fans that think he deserved so much better. And with that said, that's gonna wrap up this video. Those are 10 players who deserved another chance in my opinion. Now keep in mind there's a lot of other guys out there that weren't on this list that definitely deserve that type of praise as well. People off the top of my head are like Sam, King, LH Cloudy even, Vestola, maybe even Ans or Bumper, or Rhea, Choi Se-won after he left the charge, Sabe, Yobi, the list goes on and on. But those are the 10 guys I decided to roll with. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and who else deserved another chance in your honest opinion. And if you enjoyed this video, and you want more Overwatch League content just like this every single week, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I've been ATP, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.